Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwikta.
This is Merps. Hello. I've got nothing interesting to say this week. It's just that kind of week for me.
Just
You
an uninteresting week.
go ahead and talk. I don't know. Just say things.
All right, all right. Well, this is a podcast, so words are very important to the podcast. Spoken word. It's really what the format's all about, and so at some point, you'll you'll need to contribute some of these spoken words, preferably about Hearthstone Arena. But you know, sometimes our audience is not that picky. Just putting it out there. But I will carry the conversation to start. We have not talked about Angoro in 2 weeks now, and so it is time to finally talk about Angoro again. And this is actually, I want to jump right into deep fried meta this week. And the deep fried meta that we're going to talk about is the Ungoro curve. So this is a topic that I want to really bring home on, and this is really what's defining a lot of the Ungoro meta. So one, Ungoro is still in 7.1. Obviously, there's still crazy stuff that's happening. There's a lot of spells. All the things are happening. That is not, it's not exactly new, but, you know, it's still there. It's being hidden a little bit because of what the Ungoro cards are, which is a lot of taunts, right? Like everybody's figured out there's a lot of big things, there's a lot of taunts, there's a lot of small minis that provide big value. So the game's kind of getting extended, and it's a little bit harder to go face unless you have a lot of removals or like direct damage. But one of the things that is kind of a carryover from 7.1, but it's getting more crystallized in Ungoro, is how you draft the curve. And this is very important because it actively changes how your deck functions, right? As we know in 7.1, with the rotation out of GVG and the increase in spell bonus and the lowering of the neutral commons, we're getting to the situation where you can't curve out on two. Only certain classes can curve out on two. And in Ungoro, the classes that can curve out on two are now very well defined. So the classes that can curve out and do curve out on two are Rogue, Hunter, Mage, and sort of Warrior and sort of Druid.
Yeah.
That's it.
The Tortolan 2/2 guy helps out Druid a little bit.
And they have Power of the Wild.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
But sorry, go on.
do you want to talk about two drops?
No. Like words. Remember the state that I'm in this week. I'm gonna save my words. Okay,
All
they're
right.
gonna be important.
All right, they're
So,
going to be very
go on.
important. I'm waiting for these important words. Okay, so in terms of two drops, if you want to curve out on two, if you want to have a curve, you will need to be Rogue or Rogue or Mage or what was the other class I said curved out? Hunter, right? Obviously Hunter. Um, but it's not like you can't curve out with the other classes. It's just harder. So you can't start your draft and say, I'm going to curve out. Or if you're like 10 picks in and you're like, I'm going to go for a curve because I have like two drops already, it's still probably not going to happen. So you always have to be prepared to not have a non-functional deck. And the issue with twos is particularly important because if you're trying to go for twos and you don't get consistent twos, you lose whenever you don't draw your two because you're kind of going in on the fact that you're going to curve out. Which means if you don't curve out, you just have a significantly smaller deck than other people do. So if other people's decks start on 3 and yours starts on 2 and you have 5 2-drops and you don't pick up a 2 to have to play on turn 2, then you're going at the same speed as your opponent with 5 2-drops in your deck, whereas your opponent has on average like 4 or 5 drops. Like you're going to lose. You're not going to win from that point. So whenever you're facing what I'm going to call a normal Ungoro deck, and I'm going to put normal in quotes because there's a lot of rogues and a lot of hunters and a lot of mages out there, which means that there's actually plenty of like decks that do curve out. So when I say normal, I don't actually mean more than half. I just mean more than half the classes will try to do this. They happen to be the less popular classes and they happen to be the weaker classes. Not unconnected with the fact that they can't curve out. But the point is, when you're facing a normal deck and you are using a curve deck and you don't curve, you lose. That's a flat statement. I'm not saying you always lose, but you'll lose like 80% of the time. It's bad. It's really bad. So whenever you want to push curve, you want to actually be able to get curve if you're sacrificing anything for it. So for example, Pyros, is it a 2-drop? I don't know, but you don't sacrifice anything for it. You know, Tortellian, whatever, the turtle guy. Oh, by the way, I found this out. This is ridiculous. I found this out this week. You know turtle people? The turtle people
they're
in
not
Un'Goro?
in WoW.
They're not in Warcraft.
Yeah.
Like, Hearthstone just made up turtle people.
That's fine. They've been making up things for a while now.
Not turtle people. They made up, like, a whole new, like, race. And they're not beasts. They're people. And they just, like, made them up. And there's no backstory.
Wait. Just because they're not beasts doesn't mean they're people. It's not either, if not beast, then people.
But
right?
I think the idea is that the Tortolium things...
Tortolan. There's no I in there.
Okay. The Tortolans are supposed to be, like, turtle people. I think that's the thrust of it. You know, I'm actually going to go and read all the cards' text and try to get a little lore from it after the podcast. Just because I'm actually kind of curious now what role the turtle people have. Anyway, the Tortolan Forager is the Druid 2-drop. That is also not really a 2, right? Like, it doesn't matter how well it fits on the curve. You don't lose anything for having it in your deck. Your deck is the same size, right? It's like a loot hoarder. So you have some cards like that. So if you're filling your curve with 2-drops that do other stuff that gives you card advantage, you're fine, right? You can miss your 2, it doesn't matter. That's not a real curve card. The problem comes when you're playing like Raptors and Crocs and things like that. They're really going to screw you over later on if you don't curve out. So that means there's no middle ground when it comes to 2-drops. There's no middle ground. You can't have like 3 2-drops and have it be like significantly better than having 1 2-drop, right? Like at that point, you just want 1 2-drop and you're fine. On the other hand, if you have 5 2-drops, that's not great but okay, but having 6 is way better. Like it's that kind of it's a weird way to think about drops now. What else? Okay, so that's 2-drops, and again,
remember next week for the next Lightforge. Thank you so much, guys.
So that's 2-drops, and nothing's really changed except that there's a lot more quote unquote 2-drops like Pyros and Tortorian Forager that have more value later on, right? And even the Hatchling. Is it the Hatchling? It's the one that adapts when you have 2 things on the board.
Ravasaurus Runt.
Ravasaurus Runt.
Get these names right, man.
Sorry, all beasts are the same to me. Ravasaurus Runt, which becomes the equivalent of a 3-drop, right? If you play later on, essentially. So there's ways to get values in different places. But you just got to know when you're building your curve that if you want a solid curve and you're going for a solid curve, 1, what the likelihood is that you're going to hit that, which is not good. And 2, it's also that if you want to hit it, you got to hit it good. Like, you can't have 4 2-drops. That's an awful number of 2-drops to have. Like, you want like 6. But what I'm really going to focus on for the Un'Goro curve, and we all know the Un'Goro curve always starts on 3. You're dead if you don't start on 3. If you just have a bunch of 4-drops and nothing before that, you lose. The game's not that slow. Even if all your 4s and 5s and 6s are taunts, you're still not going to live. But what having a lack of 2-drops for half of the decks in this meta does is it opens up the 1-drop game. And what I mean by that is if your opponents are expected to miss 2s half the time and you have 2s and then you also have 1s, you are now really far ahead because 1 plus 2 is not even 3, it's like 4.
Yeah, especially 1-drops, they're typically significantly overstated, right? You get the effect of a 1-drop, and you also get an additional mana's worth of effect. It's Hearthstone's way of compensating for the fact that you're spending a card, right? There's always a cost to a card.
A card is worth about a mana.
Yeah. Wisp is a good example, right? Wisp is like sort of the formula for it. Like your card, like by spending no mana, your card, you're getting a sort of a free, quote unquote, by mana standards, +1/+1 because you are spending a card on it. Now, sometimes Hearthstone does a lot more than that, but with 1-drops, you typically get a almost 1 mana addition to it, and with 2-drops, you get like half a mana addition because 2-drops are still in that area where they can be over sort of a little bit overpowered for their cost.
So yeah, so you just get like a lot more stuff from it, and 4-drops get like 0.25 or something like that, whatever, right? Like you get a little bit more. So yeah, so 1-drop plus 2-drop equals 4-drop, which is really good when your opponent does nothing for the first 2 turns. So then you have 1-drop plus 2-drop, which is a 4-drop, and you're facing against his 3-drop, and then you take care of it, and then you still have a 3-drop left, probably a little bit extra to that, and then they drop a 4-drop, and then you still go, and then you put down your 4-drop. You're just like always ahead. And when you're always ahead, you get some face damage in, you do well. At some point, if you get 1 tempo flip in your favor, you just end the game, right? Like, that can happen if you curve out 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's now a definite advantage to curving out 1, 2, 3, 4. On the other hand, when your opponent's always had a 2-drop, the advantage is not as big. It's like almost twice as incremental, like half as meaningful, right? Because you only get your 1-drop, and then your opponent gets 2 drops, and sometimes you don't even get your 1-drop when you can coin out 2/2. So one of the, I don't know if you want to say good, but one of the effects of the 7.1 curve change, where half the decks don't have 2-drops, is that when you want to go fast, you are now actually significantly faster than your opponent. And the downside of this is when you want to go fast, you can now no longer recover in the late game ever, because your deck is so stacked. And so yeah, that's rock, paper, scissors, right? You have a fast deck, you need to do this. If you don't, you lose, right? It's like you get countered by certain decks if they have a lot of taunts or whatever.
Yeah, and it's sort of like people have seen this, right? And this is why people talk about sort of the predetermination in sort of today's meta. And a lot of focus has been put on card quality. People say, oh, just based on the card quality, I can see how far I'm going. But also the predetermination comes in the fact that like now decks are not as dynamic just because you're more solidly in the role of a rock, paper, scissors deck, right? And then basically you know that like, okay, your deck beats other types of decks but loses against these certain types of decks. And further than that, they lose against just certain cards, period, right? Sometimes you still just lose to
Tar Creeper.
I mean, a Tar Creeper, Volcanic Potion, right? If you're an aggressive deck, like those are very good against you. If you're sort of like a mid-range deck, you basically just lose to every single control deck out there because they have the tools, and you're just not fast enough. So this goes into people's complaints as well. You could see how this sort of Ungoro curve further strengthens the rock, paper, scissors aspect of the game now.
So the way to beat, like if you're thinking about the curve, right? I have painted it in a very black and white picture of, you know, you go fast, you have your edge, you don't go fast, you don't have your edge. But there's always a middle ground. And the reason a lot of these classes are successful is because they can take the middle ground. And the middle ground is 1-drops. You could take 6 1-drops, but more importantly, you don't need to take 6 1-drops. In fact, if you're not exactly, like if you're a hunter, you definitely need to push really fast, so you need to do things like that. But if you want to make a more mid-rangey deck that still curves out, which preserves you the flexibility that your old, that the pre-7.1 decks all had, right? That seems really powerful in a rock, paper, scissors meta. When you can sometimes beat rock and sometimes beat scissor and sometimes beat paper, that's great. So if you're a good player, what you want to do is create a deck as close to that as possible, assuming you don't have your win condition hunter hero power, right? So, or conversely, right? If your win condition hero power is priest or warlock, then you don't want to go fast. You want to like find a way to preserve your board. But for any of the middle classes, like rogue, like paladin, like mage, they're really powerful because they can go into this middle area. Remember how we said rogue and mage can both go aggressive because they have 2-drops? Well, on top of that, they also have a good amount of 1-drops. And on top of that, rogue also has a very favorable hero power. So they're really the 2 best classes for it. But paladin could kind of play along too. And that's not because paladin has any 2-drops. They really don't. They have the hydrologist, which is kind of a 2-drop, but really more of a 3-drop. Because you'll need a 2 anyway. If you, like, it's better than nothing, right? Like, a 2/2 is better than their 1/1 base if they follow it up with a 3-drop. But it's not great. But it still kind of fills a gap. More importantly, though, paladins have a whole crap ton of 1-drops. Like, they have a bunch of secrets. They have Lost in the Jungle now. They have that 2/1 that gives you a Divine Shield. They have the 1/3 Murloc. They have a whole.
They have a 2/1 Selfless Hero and the Chum.
Right, I forgot about the Chum. The Murloc Chum, which is also a 2/1. So they actually have a very good and diverse amount of 1-drops that they are offered, which allows them to have more 1-drops in the game than any class besides Hunter, like on a normal draft. And the good thing about Paladin is that the hero power on turn 2 plus a 1-drop essentially gives you a real 2-drop. Like, consider playing Lost in the Jungle and then a hero power. You get 3/1/1s. And then consider playing something like a Murloc Tidehunter, which is a real 2-drop. You essentially get the same things. You're actually a little better off with the Paladin spread. And that's because the hero power actually does something. So what we've done with the Lightforge tier list is we've built that in a way we haven't before. Where we've built in, because before we considered the hero power in connection as a 2-drop, right? So rogues 2-drops get a significant penalty because they get just hero power instead. But we've come to realize that the 1-drops work with the hero power even more than the 2-drops. They're in fact very reliant on the hero power if you don't curve out. So in the cases in which you don't curve out and have to rely on that hero power, the Paladin's in a very good spot. The Rogue is in a great spot. And even mages and druids are in an okay-ish spot, depending on if your opponent plays a minion that you can like use your hero power on or not, right? Like, they're not in a very good spot compared to the Paladin, but you get a little bit of a bonus on that. So you can see the changes reflected in our tier list on that. But the important part to know about that is that, especially if you're playing a class like Paladin, like, you may be wondering, right? You're like, oh, so, you know, how do Paladins work then? And we kept wondering this when Un'Goro came out, right? Paladins have no more 2-drops. How do they curve out? They still have all these things that need to buff the board. They still need to be on the board. How does this class work? And I wouldn't say the Paladin's been better than we expected, but it's been a little more consistent than we expected. And it's been consistent because, remember, the Paladin's not an aggro class anymore. It doesn't have 2s. You can have all the 1s in the world, but you don't have 2s. So instead, what the Paladin does is it uses 1s to replace their 2s with their hero power. So you actually end up with a deck that's not a lot smaller, right? Especially with the Hydrologist. It's not a lot smaller than a deck that starts on 3. And instead, you start on 2 with 1-drops. And you try to get the value back from your buffing and all of that. So it's not as... You can't go as a Paladin as fast as you can with Mage. Definitely not with a Hunter. Definitely not as as fast as a Rogue. But you can go faster than any other class because you essentially have 2-drops even when you don't have 2-drops. And you can also add 2-drops on top of that if you get offered good ones. So Paladin 1-drops have actually put them into one of the faster curves in Un'Goro, which was surprising to me because in my mind I was like, oh, 1-drops are not going to do anything. You're going to have no 2s to follow up. It's like kind of a broken class with just a bunch of really powerful cards. And I think that's where I kind of underestimated the Paladin a little. And so we moved up Paladin 1-drops and, including neutral 1-drops in Paladin by quite a significant amount. Because that's really how you build the base upon which you can buff and which you can do like normal Paladin-y things.
Yep. I think that's a good sort of reason why people have seen that Paladin is pretty strong in this metagame, right? It's easy to just point to the good cards that they've gotten, and Vinecleaver, Spikeridge Steed are indeed 2 of the best cards, period, regardless of class, in this expansion. But it is also good to point out sort of the underrated aspects of how they became so good, right? And I think Lost in the Jungle sort of impacting how they play out on the early turns really does make a difference. And we've seen that for a lot of classes as well. Whenever these new class 2-drops, whenever they do something more than just become a 2-drop, right? They are so valuable these days. So like Hydrologist helps out Paladin a lot. The Arcanologist helps out Mage a lot, which is part of the reason Mage is so strong right now. And even though they don't have the offering bonus, you still have something like Undercity Huckster, right, for Rogue, which has always been a very premium card.
Rogues have more 2-drops than anyone besides Hunter, even without the hero power. That's why Rogue is in a stupid place right now, like power-wise.
Right. But when we were talking about 1-drops the other day, we have realized sort of a lot of classes based on their one drop, like if you have a two drop that sort of complements or supplements your one drop, it's very helpful. And the Paladin's hero power with Lost in the Jungle, it's like the perfect complement, right? You basically take care of sort of any any kind of turn one plus hero power or their solitary turn two play. So you get something that's a lot more flexible than a two drop, and which has synergies with the rest of your deck. There's certainly more synergies with Silverhand Recruits than random two drops, right? So you have more flexibility, and you get a properly statted two drop, but you have more initiative because it comes out in turn one.
Yep. And I mean that's why, right? Like if you're thinking about the classes we're talking about, it's Mage, it's Hunter, it's Rogue, it's Paladin now, it's Druid. That's 4 of the almost unanimously considered top 4 classes in the meta right now, and what we consider the top 4 classes as well, plus Druid. Right?
Yeah.
So Druid's kind of the odd one out, where, you know what, we're going to jump something on this little agenda that we always have for the Lightforge. And we're going to talk about class win rates. So we've been getting class win rates for like weeks now, like from hsreplay.net and now from Hearth Arena, and they're very consistent with each other, and it is showing the same thing, right? It's saying Rogue, Mage are on top. It's saying Paladin's very close, if not the same. And then it's saying Hunter's in like the next level down with, some of the other classes. And carrying up the very bottom is Warrior being real crappy, which we all knew.
Really bad.
Like insanely
37% win rate.
Yeah,
Yep.
like really bad. And then Druid being second worst, which is 5% higher win rate, but like still really bad compared to the other classes. And that's, very expected. And without commenting on the topper, we all know why Hunter's not at the very top, right? We keep saying this, like Hunter's a heavy skill class, and it plays very different than other classes. You never expect, like if the Hunter is the highest win rate class in Arena, something's wrong. Like something horribly wrong.
That just means if Hunter is ever the number one class, that just means that Hunter is so overpowered, like ridiculously overpowered, because it should not be.
Because keep in mind, all these like stat aggregators do is they take average players, or like average players who track, so like above average players,
right?
But not like good players necessarily, right? Like on average, the trackers are probably like, I don't know, 60th percentile, 70th percentile of the whole Arena population base. So they're not playing, like the stats that you're tracking are not your win rates when playing these classes and drafting for these classes optimally. They are instead what you get when you have players who sort of know what they're doing for the most part, but also don't. And so there's some things that are expected, right? Like Hunters are always going to be lower, and from what we've seen in the past, Druids are always lower than what we think their power level is. And we have stats from like all the good players to back up that Druid always does better than what these stats show, right? You look at all the like streamers and all the pro players who play Arena, Druid always comes out to be median or like a little better than median, right? And then you look at average stats from players, and Druid is always crappy because they don't have very good cards. And the reason that the really good players are always doing okay with Druid, right? Like Trump was the original from way back in the value days, right? Druid was his best class. And it was always like that because you have the hero power. It's always there. You have infinite flexibility with the Druid because it's a very flexible, choose one, everything's in the middle kind of class. So the more you understand the game and when to push and when to hold and whether you have card advantage and what to prepare against and all of that, the more you can get value out of the Druid. And it's all by inches. So if you can't get those inches, it adds up and you're missing like 8 mana's worth of tempo by the end, and you're obviously not going to win. But if you pick up on each of those small spots, you end up with like, just enough to win the game. It's never the easiest class to get 12 wins on, but the average is pretty high. Like Druid's second worst class stat-wise, totally believe it, but we still think it's at the same level as all of the other non-top 4 classes besides Warrior. And I wanted to point that out just because the top 4 classes, the unanimous top 4 classes in whatever order, are all the classes that can curve out. And it's because there's a huge value to being able to curve out at Un'Goro. I know everyone thinks 7.1 came and like Curvestone is dead, but look at the stats. Like, even for the regular players playing on, like, 3-win averages, 4-win averages, what have you, Curvestone is not dead. Because the classes in which they're curving out very well, and I know, for a fact that Hearth Arena still tries to get you a curve, because that's how it's programmed, even on 2, whether you need it or not. Like, all of those that are pushing people to get on the curve, it gets you the curve, and the curve is still doing work, right? Like, at the end of the day, the curve is not completely meaningless.
No, and I would say for more quote average players, curve is even more important, right? Because they're like for them, the board presence is definitely a little bit better. They're able to trend more aggressive, and they don't have to sort of turn plan as much, right? Being like, oh God, how do I get myself out of this sort of 2-mana deficit at the beginning of the game? It's much easier to operate if you're the average player, if you are ahead or if you are just even, right?
So what you need to do are, as far as curve goes, is to hit that nice middle spot, which is around, Hunter aside. I'm going to set Hunter aside. But for the other classes, you need to hit like 6 1 or 2 drops. Like actual 1 or 2 drops that allow you to go. And with Paladin and with Rogue, first of all, with Rogue, you already have it. You have infinite amount of 2 drops. It's called your hero power. So you're already set. Like, Rogue always curves out no matter what. You cannot possibly play a Rogue and say this is not a curve Rogue, unless you're missing 3s. That's the only way that it's not a curve Rogue. Because otherwise, you're curved out on 2 already, and you don't need to curve out on 1 because you have infinite curve out on 2. So, Rogue is, like, it's nonsensical to say I play a Rogue that doesn't curve out unless you mean 3 or 4. Like, Rogue always curves out on 2, and you don't need to curve out on 1. Paladins, you need to curve out on 1 for the most part. If you get a couple 2s, you can replace 1s with them, right? Like, that's kind of how you should think when you're doing Paladin. And Mage, you can use your hero power like half the time. So you still need like 5 or 6 1 or 2 drops. And that's the optimal way to play. It gives you the most flexibility. Now, of course, you can make an aggro deck and go even more aggro, but you don't really need to. And rogues can go aggro as well, right? You can have like a whole bunch of 2 drops too on top of your hero power. You get a whole bunch of 1 drops. So this is how important the curve is in this meta. And if you look at the bad classes, they don't have curves, and it's killer. Like, you look at Shaman, and they have all the elemental synergies now. Volcano's a great card. They have Tidal Surge, which is a removal, right? Like, if you just, in a vacuum, looked at the Shaman and what they got in Ungoro, you're probably like, this is a pretty good class. Like, they have, they're not Paladin levels of what ridiculous stuff they receive. They're not Rogue levels of what ridiculous stuff that they receive. But they're doing about as well as, your mages and your anything else with it. And the reason that Shamans aren't quite cutting it is very simple. It's because they don't have 1 drops and they don't have 2 drops. They have like 1 2 drop and it's an epic. That's it. It's the eternal, anti-overload dude. That's a 3/2. That's it. They have a bunch of like weapons, but they're really 3 drops because they overload on 3, so they force you to play another 2 drop afterwards, which you still don't have, and you have the hero power. And their hero power is mostly worthless in the early game. They are the equivalent of taunt a little bit of damage. They're like a warrior hero power. And the warrior hero power is really bad, and the priest hero power is really bad, in the early game. And the warlock hero power is really bad in the early game. So you have all these classes that are bad, and they're tied together by one thing, which is that they are unable to curve out, and they don't have the 2 drops anymore to support their ability to curve out. And they can't get back. Not because they don't have great cards that come back. Shaman, if anything, have Volcano. It's like the best comeback card in the entire game, almost, right? Warlock have a whole ton of double-sided board clears too. Warriors can't get back. They suck. Priests are also not that good at getting back, so you're just kind of hoping to put value on the board. Like, you have your back against the wall, basically. But, at the end of the day, what you're doing with these other classes is you're fighting a losing battle, because you're facing mages, you're facing rogues, you're facing paladins, and you're facing hunters, and they all curve out. And you don't. And this is a very, very, very bad arena design. when it comes to what Blizzard is doing for class balance. Like, the classes have not been so unbalanced. Like, in MSG, classes were fairly balanced. Before MSG, classes were really balanced. But now, classes are horribly unbalanced. And it's because Blizzard specifically did one thing that is affecting everything, which is that they made some classes curve out and some classes not. And when you do that in a very fundamentals-based, place like the arena, the ones that curve out will be the ones that do better.
Yeah. It's kind of a shame. I mean, this is the problem that we were talking about, right? When they implemented the 7.1 changes, and then we saw how it was going to be. Like, a lot of things that have been sort of hiding or have been able to allow people to gloss over the problems. Like, the 7.1 meta was only for a month, and just as people were starting to really complain about it in the last 2 weeks, the expansion came out, right? Mm-hmm. And sort of people were busy playing the expansion and being happy with the new cards, especially sort of just being in awe of the power level of the cards, right? And now we're sort of at a point where we're 2 weeks plus into the expansion. Novelty factor is worn out. New players are either gone or they're playing less frequently, right? They've moved back to,
They can always improve. I believe that players can improve in the arena.
Well, they can improve. It's whether or not they stick around for it. And I think we see sort of the problems that we basically saw 2 months ago when they changed, when they patched 7.1. Like, the problems are still there. And at a certain point, we have to actually address them, right? Now we're getting into the real dead time, because I don't think we're getting a new expansion until, August? Like, it should be around August, right?
June or August. That's July or August, yeah. End of July or early August.
So we've still got at least, 2 months to go. And these will be a pretty rough 2 months. And I think Blizzard will have to do something to address it. We've been through sort of Arena Warriors Matter. We've seen the One Night in Karazhan, sort of Mage. We survived all of those, and I think we're getting to a point where something else has to be done. Otherwise, with the class win rates, with how much people have been complaining about sort of deck quality, I don't know. I don't love the direction. Not even direction. I don't like how Arena has been going the past 2 months. And now we don't even have anything to sort of shake things up and make people forget about the potential issues anymore.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at how to succeed as one of the lower the lower classes, what you need is really high power cards that can flip the board regardless of your opponent's curve later on, because your opponents are likely going to curve out over you. And if you fight for the curve, you don't have enough to kind of sustain yourself. Exception being Warlock. Warlock has enough to sustain themselves, but they don't have mid-game kind of cards, so they're very stable on the board. We'll get into that later. But if Blizzard's going down this path of just saying your 2-drops are not part of the curve necessarily, they're only part of the curve for more aggro decks, then they need to get rid of that part of the curve for all the classes. You can't have some classes with it and some classes without. Or if you do, it has to be part of some plan. Blizzard has no plan right now for this. That's why mages have it. That's why druids have it. That's why warriors don't have it. That's why warlocks. How crazy is it that warlocks don't have a 2 curve? That's just so wrong on so many levels that warlocks do not have a 2 curve. And it's what happens because Blizzard's not designing these cards with Arena in mind, as they generally don't. But they now have the tools to actually make whatever offering odds they want to make this a better place. And they've used it to make this a worse place. They've very specifically used it to create rules that we knew from the very beginning when they were coming out what the effects were. Again, this is Arena. We predict effects and they happen. Not because we're brilliant, but because it's not that hard of a system to predict.
Right. And increasing spells, we've said it from the beginning. It's a bad change.
Yeah, and look, it's not. I still don't know whether I really don't think they're thinking about it, because I don't think they're like not smart enough that they can't figure this out. Like I said, this is not like rocket science we're doing here. Like almost all the top arena players can make the same and do make the very similar conclusions about the meta that we do. We may go a bit more in detail with it, but like the spell change, for example, was not something you needed to go into too much detail to realize how bad it was. And then what they are doing, though, is they're just responding, right? People wanted spells. People wanted to see more spells. Why? Because in Constructed, you would put all the spells into your decks. And so in Arena, you didn't, and so you wanted more spells. Why? Spells. Spells good. Spells allow me to do stuff, so I don't feel like I am forever behind on the board because my opponent's a better player. Well, that's bad, because if your opponent's a better player and is getting on the board, then you should not have that many comeback mechanisms. Spells are almost always less skill-based than minions, because they allow you to immediately do something, which allows you to mop up mistakes. But more important than that, when you increase spells, you've decreased minions, and then you got rid of GVG, and now you don't have a curve at all. Like, for some classes, I mean. And to the classes that do have a curve, it's purely dependent on what the current set's offering bonus stuff is giving you. Like, and in a way in which you have not predetermined that this is the direction you want your game to go. Instead, it is purely random and by happenstance that certain classes are getting 2-drops for the arena and certain classes are not. Like, so now you have a mess. Now you just have a total mess on your hands, and it's being caused by the spell increase because it's the same as having a minion decrease, and you were already in a minion problem. Yes, Arena is now more quote-unquote exciting than it used to be. Yes, I'm sure worse players are winning more games, and that's making the average happiness level go up, maybe. But you're destroying the Arena when it comes to being a skill-based game. It is much less skill-based now than it was 2 months ago. It's a little better than 7.1, obviously, because 7.1 was by far the worst.
Right, and I will cut it because I can just imagine the responses to this, because this is just how the internet is. You make a comment like it is less skill based. They're like, oh wait, but like such and such player, you know, like streamer, just got like 3 12 wins in a row, and like I keep on hearing these comments. Us saying that it is less skill based now doesn't mean it takes no skill to play, right? It's not like everyone's win rate will be between 2.5 and 3.5 now. You can still be an infinite player. You can still do that. But the ceiling is now lower. And the ceiling doesn't have to, like, remember us saying that when you get above 7.0, when you get above 7.5, each 0.1 is so significant, right? Mm-hmm. Supremely significant. And especially now, like, a lot of those, so whenever you go up 0.1, it means that you're making really, really good reads. You are like making you're really differentiating between the 45% plays within the game. And the problem is in the 7.1, the post 7.1 meta, a lot of sort of your losses now are not stuff that you can control. So like now, whenever you go, which not only feels bad, but lowers the incentives of people to sort of really try to reach for like the absolute heights of the arena.
No, I mean, you're still looking at win rates. I don't know why you're even looking at win rates. Win rates are determined by the softness of the meta. So I'm sure 7.1 was pretty high win rates. I didn't really like do the math on it or something. Sure. But that's because it came with a spike of new players. And so your win rates are all going to go up if you know what you're doing.
Theoretical, normalized win rate, right? Which there isn't one. But, I like to use win rates as just sort of an example. But no, it's totally correct. It's based on the meta. It's based on sort of, new players and how many players there are. But yeah, I'll amend my statement to talk about sort of relative win rate then.
Okay, yeah. I mean, what's going to happen is Blizzard is totally aware of the win rates. Blizzard is looking at the win rates, and Blizzard's not going to see a problem. Because it's not going to show up in the win rates. So you talking about win rates makes it seem like it's going to show up in the win rates. It won't, at least for now. If Blizzard doesn't do anything for 2 months, then it'll show up in the win rates. But it's not there right now. They'll look at March, and they'll see everything's fine. They'll look at April, and they'll see everything's fine. And they're like, what are these people complaining about? They're just not adjusting to this meta.
Oh, yeah. It's just like... for example, if Blizzard allowed me access to the stats, I'd love to see, for example, if you take out if you take out the first 2 weeks in the 7.1 meta, right? And also for this month, if you take out the first 2 weeks after the expansion came out and just isolate to the last 2 weeks, I'd want to look at the difference, right?
And there will be a difference, but Blizzard's not going to look at that because they're a corporate entity and they operate on month.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, March was fine. They're going to look at April and be like, April was fine. Then they're going to look at May and be like, there could be a problem in May. Let's wait a month and see if there's still a problem. And then there's going to be June, and they're going to be like, oh, wow, there's a problem. And they're going to try to fix it. They're going to spend July coming up with a way to fix it, and they're going to implement it with the next expansion. So I feel like we're not going to get, like, at least based on them observing win rates, we wouldn't get anything, right? Like, maybe now that enough arena players have spoken up about this, you know, between 7.1, because when 7.1 came out, I think a lot of streamers were like, hey, this is good, because they liked some of this, like golden cards, right? That was good. The change in rarities, I think, was generally good. Too many epics, but that got solved in Ungoro just kind of naturally.
Yeah.
Like, one thing Ungoro did really well to solve the issue was it totally solved the epics problem. Instead of 0.7, it's now 0.5, and they actually put in a whole bunch of really good epics that are really big and game-changing, so it actually feels good to, like, get those epics. Some of those epics may not be good for the game, like Primordial Drake is awful for the game, but well, that's a whole different issue. What I want to say is, when things first came out, everyone was kind of... I would say like at least half the streamers were like, this is good. And then they are all very slowly within the course of March coming down to the idea that, no, this is not good. This is actually bad. And when Ungoro came, it just depends on how far you can see into the issue, right? Like, if you view the issue from a fundamental perspective, like, you know what the meta is, and you know where the meta is going, and you know what the fundamental, like, settings are, where things will regress to, you know everything that's going to happen. Like, that's the position that I start from, so I don't think it affects me whether the meta's soft or the meta's, like, less soft when it comes to my predictions and my evaluations of whether a meta is good or bad. So, like, that's why from the very beginning, we were very vocal, and we still are, obviously, because nothing's changed, about the problems that the spell increase causes. And now we're getting more support as people are slowly realizing from their experiences as the kind of the fluff gets pulled away, right? As the fluff dissipates from the meta, you get a better sense of what these changes are actually doing if you're relying on experience rather than a priori evaluations. So.
It's so sad because when you talk about sort of your timeline, right? It's exactly what I think is going to happen. Like they implement these changes, but they implement the changes like after 7.1, you only have a month, and you can't evaluate it based on, because whenever there's an influx of new players, it'll artificially create this like fluffed up meta, right? This untrue meta because all these new players come in. It mixes up everything.
Only when it comes to win rates.
Yes. Not so. I mean, you still see like crazy stuff, right? Like the craziness, quote unquote. You know, like people were complaining about Dragonfire potions.
Well, yeah, but the craziness, if anything, increases with more new players, not decreases. So it's actually going to get less and less crazy, but it's going to get worse and worse.
It's going to get worse because players are good. Yeah. Right. Like you're not going to end up with like when the expansion first came out, and we saw a lot of players in the 0-0 or 1-0 bracket do some very questionable things, right? At the beginning of their games, and you don't see those anymore. No, you just see the people that
still kind of do. I'd say I think the meta's still pretty soft.
It's all right, but you definitely see a lot of the crazy stuff, right? And it's kind of a shame because I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Blizzard is going to use March and April and see, oh, the win rates are absolutely fine, right? Like not only in the top 100, but also just generally. And then I think next month will be interesting, right? Because I think next month will be slightly different, but then they could just look at it and be like, well, not that big of a problem, right? It's just 1 month. And then after that, even if they think that there is a problem, you're right, it's too close to the new expansion. So they could either do what you said and roll out some changes with the expansion, or just say the expansion will fix things, or the expansion will change some things,
Yep.
and
That's
we don't want
something
to
out
touch
of
them.
yeah. That's their problem, right? And that's
Yeah.
all the problem because they don't look at everything from an empirical perspective. They always talk about, oh, the stats say this, oh, the stats say that. I am so freaking annoyed about the stats because the way you solve a problem is not through empirical analysis unless you actually know how to interpret the stats. Or you have the stats filtered in such a way that it's actually providing meaningful information, which their stats do not. They do not have very sophisticated ways of cutting the stats up, and they do not have very sophisticated, professionally trained people at how to interpret these stats. They don't. They have people who are game designers, who are, you know, great at designing fun games, but they're not like statisticians, so they're misinterpreting their own stats. And on top of that, if you're just relying on stats and you need a big enough body of stats for you to make an action, you're always going to be behind the curve. You're always going to be behind when these problems can be solved a priori in a very simple way because the whole system is not like you use empirical data when your system is way too complicated that no one can ever figure it out. But that's not the case in the arena. Like, maybe that's the case in Constructed. I don't really know. Constructed is too complicated for me to figure out when it comes to deck building. Like, you can never, even if I knew the Constructed meta down, there's no way I would ever be able to predict, like, when I see a new card and be like, oh, that card's going to be good. I wouldn't be able to do it. Like, because it's just it's such a hard problem in my mind, right? Like, the meta shifts with any deck increasing in popularity and whatever. Like, I can't wrap my brain around it.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you can, like, build an algorithm to take into account of that or anything like that. But when it comes to the arena, it is that straightforward because everything's by offering odds, which means everything is random to that exact extent, and you can plot everything out, and people's behaviors are all incentivized in the exact same way. Like, you can look at the spell bonus and you can see the effects even before the effects happen. And so when the effects are being clouded by stuff, you still know that the effects are there. You just need to wait for the other stuff to go away before you can actually see this and experience it. So they just have to wait for everything before they can actually do an action. Like, they're not starting in the beginning and saying this makes no sense. They're starting and saying people want this, we will try this, we will look at the results, we will keep looking at the results until there's something wrong, then we will fix it. Which means it takes 4 months, 3 months earliest, to fix something that they do wrong. And they had never a good reason to do any of the stuff they did. Besides people, namely generally average players, or maybe average players who like care more, so like slightly above average players, it's what they want and how they would design the game. Which means they're not very good at balancing the game, and they're also not very good at playing the game. Generally speaking. Like, I'm sure some of the 4 or 5 win players are game designers and, or statisticians or, like, people who could have very valuable input. But most people are just going by what feels good and what feels bad because it's a game to them, right? Like, Flame Strike feels bad. Kill it. Abyssal Enforcer feels bad. Kill it. Spells feel good because I want more Frostbolts. That feels like what's skillful because when my opponent tries to do something crazy, I can stop it. Not thinking, well, then whenever I try to do anything skillful, my opponents can also stop it. Like, that's 2 steps, right? And you have a higher percentage of people who will think 1 step than 2 steps. Higher percentage who will think 2 steps than 3 steps. At the end of the day, that's just not how you design a game. At least not one that's good for skill. That could be how you design a game to keep people hooked. That could be how you design a game to sell more units. I don't know if any of those are actually what's driving Blizzard when it comes to the arena. Like, that's not even their main, like, moneymaker or anything like that. Like, I think, honestly, they're trying to make Arena better, and I think they're failing at this point. But at least they have the tools now, right? At least they can't say we don't have the tools.
Yeah, and, man, it's kind of a shame. Like, I don't think when we started this Lightforge, we expected to sort of go on this rant about this, but it's kind of impossible not to point out this stuff. It's just... I don't know, like, whenever you bring up something like the curve or the win rate, it has to tie into the fundamental sort of like principles and changes that Blizzard has made, right?
Because this wasn't a problem. This was never a problem. This is a totally man-made problem if we consider the natural state of things, just let all cards be in the arena at the exact same offering rate, right? Like, if we consider that the fundamental natural state of the arena, these are all man-made problems.
Yep.
All right. So let's do question from the GOAT.
Question from the GOAT. All right. Let's move away from the serious, or the ranty stuff. So question from the GOAT this week is just going to be about us. All right.
Oh. Okay.
All right. So it is my birthday tomorrow. I am turning 31, and by tomorrow, I mean the April 24th. So those of you listening on the podcast, you will be listening on my birthday, probably.
Am I also having a birthday tomorrow?
No. No. It's just me.
You said it was about us. I was so hopeful. I was like, ooh, another birthday.
No, it's about us, but it's really about me. But I will ask a question to you, but it's really about me. So honestly, like, and I was thinking, because the topic of like birthday presents and stuff has come up. What has been your best/worst like birthday present? You can tell us about the best. You can tell us about the worst.
Okay.
Just, share a story with us.
Well, I have not had a birthday since I was 10. 10 was my last birthday.
So
and then
you're still 10.
No. Okay. I had a birthday when I was 18, and I had one when I was 21. Because 18 is when you become like a real human being when it comes to the eyes of the law, and 21 is when you're allowed to drink in America. So that's like legally, and you can buy alcohol, and so that's like very important to someone in college. Yes, people in America spend most of the time in college not being able to legally buy or drink or do anything with alcohol. Like, it's crazy. But that aside, like, I didn't really have birthdays. I don't really like celebrate birthdays, so that's a weird question. I remember, I think it was like 16 or 15 when we were in high school, and I had it was my birthday, but I also don't tell people my birthday because I don't celebrate it. So no one knew, but you knew, and you gave me a Snapple, and you said, like, I think you wrote it on something, but I remember this very clearly because I'm like, yes, this is one of the best gifts I've ever gotten for my birthday. And it says, you are now 1 year closer to death.
Yep, exactly.
And
it was very in line with adulthood those days.
It was, and I think that was a very sweet gift, and it was the exact kind of gift that I would appreciate because it is just a Snapple. It was very meaningful. So that was one of my best birthday presents, I think.
And
my worst one would probably be like, I think my 11th birthday present, where for the first year ever you don't get a present. It's not very fun for an 11-year-old.
No, definitely not. Let's see. Yeah, all right. Both of us are the kind of people in which we don't really do birthdays. Like tomorrow, I've had people ask me what I'm doing for my birthday. I was like, no, I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna grab a workout. I'm gonna probably come back and stream, and that's about it. Like, I don't do anything for my birthday at all. I remember, what did I do for my 21st birthday? See, I spent my 21st birthday in London, actually, because I was studying abroad at that time, and it was
super anticlimactic.
It was very anticlimactic because it didn't matter there, and plus I wasn't with my friends back home, so I just went to like a bar and I got a pint. I didn't talk to anyone. I drank the pint. I was like,
wait, you went to a bar alone and you drank a pint?
I drank a pint, and then I got like what was it? What was one of those meat pies? It was like pasties or something. I got like two of those.
Never lived in London.
Yeah. I got one of those, and then I went back to get a drink by myself, and then I went to get a kebab, and then I went home to, I think, play some Freestyle Street Basketball.
Freestyle Street Basketball. I know. I was like, that was during the Freestyle Street Basketball era. There's no way the story does not end with some Freestyle Street Basketball.
And then I went to bed, and that was basically it. Yep. Dude, Freestyle Street Basketball kind of ruined my semester abroad. I should have like met people. I should have explored the world more.
I know. I was, not in that position, and so I was like playing, and you were like spending your time up to like 5 a.m. playing on super high ping. Like, it was extremely laggy for you. It was like awful.
I know, it was bad. It's all right. I didn't need culture or education anyways. It's all good. But yes, that was my 21st birthday. I ate a lot of good/bad food and celebrated by myself.
Wow, this got real depressing. Real quick.
I don't do birthdays. No, it's like, what is so freaking... Okay, here's the thing, right? I think birthdays, it's like one of the narcissistic things. Like, if you're celebrating a birthday of a famous person who like impacted the world, right? I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah, it was really good that person was born.
Right. it's really good that this person was born, or you're celebrating a big event or something, right? You're celebrating the day that you came into this world. What did you really do? Okay?
No. I mean, you should really celebrate your mother. That should just be Mother's Day.
Exactly.
You should have as many Mother's Days as you have children. Because those are like, you went through a lot of crap on those days as a mother.
That's totally correct. And no. So like, you either should celebrate your mother for actually giving you life, or if you're celebrating yourself, you better have done freaking something for the world, right? Like, okay, those people who have like Nobel Prizes by the time they're 20 years old, it's like, okay, celebrate your birthday. You did something. Yeah. Good for you. Like, what did I do, really? Like,
nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing with your life so far.
No, wait. Oh, damn.
Just making it more and more depressing. Yeah, I mean, no, that's how I feel about birthdays too. But you know, I was scarred as a young child, so I don't try to push my birthday ideas onto other people, because I recognize that, although I think this is very logical, that there's probably some other components to a birthday that I don't understand. It also means I'm really awkward at birthday parties, like more so than regular parties.
Birthday parties are okay. I just tend to eat the food, congratulate the person, then head out. Yeah. Especially if they have ice cream cake. That's MVP.
That's the best. Ice cream cakes are the MVP of birthday cakes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's question from the GOAT, brought to you by our patrons. Our patrons for the month of March. Top patrons are 4P, Afro Ninja, Famous Wild Goat, Ingo, Talon, and Ugbug. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, and we have some patrons coming for this month, but we update them monthly. So we will give you guys your appropriate shout out very soon.
We take your money at the end of the month, so that's when we give the shout out. This is why we don't have birthdays. Okay, so our patron is patreon.com/grinninggoat. It's how you support us. And if you guys heard, there's like a Twitch announcement where Twitch is starting to do like a similar thing, and we don't know if we're going to switch or not. Depends on some of the stuff that's gonna happen. But I think regardless, our Patreon will live on and will be one of the primary ways that we support ourselves. We may just also open the Twitch thing, depending, and that'll be for Twitch, not for people who watch our YouTube or listen to our podcast. Okay, so let's wrap this up with a card good bad and some more talk about the Warrior. Card good bad today, where we tell you whether a card is good or bad, is Stonehill Defender. I think we need to do one of the bad Ungoro cards soon, but let's do Stonehill Defender for now.
I pitched Explore Ungoro.
I really did not want to talk about Explore Ungoro. We could talk about it. It's bad.
I remember when we first saw this card. A lot of people were like, I don't understand why it's so good. It's just Silverback Patriarch with a card draw. But okay, whenever you talk about any bad card with a card draw, that's really freaking good. Like, it just becomes really freaking good. Stonehill Defender, like the 1/4 body with the taunt, it either soaks up so much damage or the 1 damage ping is actually relevant. Discover mechanics are so powerful because it's like drafting mid-game, right? So you have more information. You don't need the smaller stuff anymore, or you can choose exactly what you want out of it. Stonehill Defender is really one of the cards that I think people have identified as sort of the sleeper MVP of this meta or this expansion, in which people are drafting it at a almost premium rate, right? Which I understand is something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so Stonehill Defender we rate a 120. It's one of the best cards in Ungoro and overall for the neutrals, but it's not like top premium. It's good because if you think about it, compare it to Gnomish Inventor, for example, it's a 1/4 with taunt rather than a 2/4 without taunt, which is kind of similar, I'd say. And on top of that, you get a free draw, so the draw is worth 1 mana. Sorry, yeah, not the draw is worth 1 mana. So you're just getting a bonus 1 mana compared to Gnomish Inventor. And Gnomish Inventors are already pretty good. That's like the 2/4 that draws you a card for 4 mana. So you get a free mana, you can play it a turn earlier, and on top of that, rather than getting a card from your deck, you're discovering a card, which again, really good to discover cards, and you know it's a taunt. So taunt cards are generally better than your regular cards, so you're already getting a little bonus there. It's just a lot of little bonuses stacked up, and it really makes it a very powerful, like, draw kind of card. Now, a lot of people, and this is very influenced by Constructed, I always hate it when Constructed comes in and influences the arena this way in terms of people's perceptions. Like, sometimes I'll see people keep picking, like, a particular card, and I'm like, why? And then eventually someone tells me, oh, that's in a Constructed deck. Or, oh, that's in every Constructed Paladin deck. And I'm like, oh, that's why. So, some people think Stonehill Defender is super, super premium Paladin. Like, extremely premium. Like, better than Gastropod, better than Wasp on the level of True Silvers and Consecrations and, you know, all that stuff. That is not true. It is not that premium. It is not that premium because your odds of actually getting one of the... And they think it's that premium because it's in every Paladin deck, because in these Paladin decks, which are, you know, fairly control-based from what I understand, having the chance to draw a taunt, one, always plays directly into your game plan, and two, like, Paladins do have really insane taunts, right? Like, they have the new, like, Tarim, like, legendary, they have...
Sunkeeper Tarim, Tyrion, Burger Bristle...
Burger Bristle, okay, Grimestree Protector. Yeah. Burger Bristle is not really even terribly good because it's only 3 mana. I don't know what the card's called. They're legendaries.
Just call it Wicker Flame.
Okay, Wicker Flame is not like that good because when you're drawing it, you want bigger cards generally. Like, it's a really good card if you're drafting it, but that's because you could potentially play it on turn 3. You're generally not playing Stonehill Defender on turn 3 because you lose a whole ton of tempo like that. You're playing way later, so you just want a bigger card. So one, Wicker Flame is not terribly good. As something to draw. Tyrion, on the other hand, is really, really, really good. Sunkeeper Tarim is really, really, really good. And Grimestree Protector is really, really good. So you do have some really good cards. We do give it 6 more points in Paladin, which puts it near premium. But your odds of getting any of those 3 are something like, I think, like 25%. I did the math here. I don't have the math in front of me. But it's not actually really that high. It's a consideration. It's a consideration other classes don't have. We also give Shaman 3 points. They also have some good taunts. But it's just a consideration. It's not a game changer for the card. It doesn't make this card ridiculously amazing compared to, like, oh, it's a good card, right? Like, it doesn't move the needle that much. Now, if you're creating a Paladin control deck that relies on a lot of taunts, okay, that's really, really good, right? But that's because of how the deck is constructed. That's not necessarily because of, like, your increased offering odds of these really amazing Paladin taunts. The offering odds when you factor in everything is actually, like, not too impressive.
Yeah. Because, look, it definitely is good when you get a Tyrion or you get a Sunkeeper out of it. And I see some people already riding. It's like, oh, but it's so good when you get, like, no, we go by the averages here, right?
Well, we go by the averages, and then we penalize for RNG. So right, it's even less than the average.
But sure, it's like, it is quite good once you get those. And I don't know, like, the responses I'm seeing are almost like, no, you certainly haven't accounted for the fact that, like, the card is this good. It's like, no, you account for that.
We know how good these cards are. We rated Sunkeeper Tarim a 175 and Tyrion a 160.
Right.
Like, they're really good. Sunkeeper Tarim is above Deathwing. Like, we love Sunkeeper Tarim.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's one of the ways that Paladins, as an inflexible class, has such choice over board manipulation, right? So it is really, really ridiculously good. But yeah, like, at the end of the day, you are not always going to get through those cards. And yes, it moves the needle a little bit, but I think this, like, what we want to do is basically stop people from being like, okay, this is, like, the auto pick. If I see Stonehill Defender, I'm not picking, like...
Or, like, I'm debating between Stonehill Defender and Outdoor Peacekeeper. No, take the Outdoor Peacekeeper. In almost no circumstances would you rather have a Stonehill Defender than an Outdoor Peacekeeper.
Right. And this is one of those situations where I think people really focus on the top end, right? They focus on the top end, And they're like, and then whenever they don't get the Tyrion, it's like, I just got really unlucky here, right? It's like, oh, forget it. It's still a really good card. And then whenever they do get the Tyrion and they win off the Tyrion, because sometimes you can't even get to play it once you anti-temple yourself, and then they remember those situations specifically. So this is basically just us saying that yes, Stonehill Defender is really good. Do not get swept up in the super hype that I see people get swept up in by this card, especially in something with Paladin, you know?
Yep. So yeah, that's Stonehill Defender, and let's go and finish this up with Class Talk Warrior. We unfortunately have to play the Warrior sometimes, and so for the Arena Coup, we're playing the Warrior this week. It's not in a good spot. It's not going to be in a good spot. So let's get this out of the way.
All right, so I've actually played a decent amount of Warrior.
So you've lost a lot.
Yes, I've lost a lot. I mean, look, the best I've done with Warrior, I think, is like 7 wins, right? They're in such a bad spot. Like you can basically tell in all of the decks that I've gotten, I haven't gotten more than 2 weapons. I'm not counting upgrades, right? Like, you know, sort of like crappy Lights Justices, if you want to call it that, right? You are sort of statistically going to get, what is it, like 0.8 Molten Blades? So you should get like 1 Molten Blade, right?
Yeah.
But Molten Blade is a weapon that does nothing when you draw on the first turn, which really sucks. So it's always a 1-turn delayed weapon.
Yep.
And by the way, it can turn into itself, which is not great. And whenever it turns into something, you have to think about, well, like if it just turns into a Fool's Bane, but it's on turn 3, you're just like, oh, this is so bad. And then you can never plan for Molten Blade, right?
Nope.
Which is really bad. Because of the spell bonus.
Plan.
Yeah, because of the spell bonus, you're going to get spells more so than weapons. And spells, especially like with the offering bonus now, you're going to get Explore Ungoros. You're going to get Sudden Genesis, right? You're going to get those cards. And I've done some tricky things with them and, you know, had my share of fun, but Warrior spells are really not good.
There's this one argument for Explore Ungoro that I keep hearing, and there's some merit to it. It is not being included in the tier list, but I do say that they're like the consideration. But there is some merit to it, which is that Warriors are so bad that is the only way you can win games. That's where we're at. That you just have to up the RNG tenfold because you have selected a class that is so bad that any time that you can roll the dice, you should roll the dice. We're trying to pretend in the tier list that Warrior is a, you know, class that exists in this game rather than an extremely handicapped piece of crap that it is. But I see where you're coming from, and maybe Explore Ungoro is the only way for a Warrior to get 12 wins. You just have to, you know, make it to the late game and then get really lucky with your Explore Ungoros. Maybe. But we try to value things not with that in mind. We don't, like, give RNG bonuses to bad classes and more RNG penalties to good classes. That's not how the tier list works.
Yeah. No, it's what, and I have seen it as well. Like, I've seen some people say, "Oh, like Explore Ungoro is actually not a bad card. I've had it work here." It's actually it's like impossible for Explore Ungoro to actually be good. Like, just look at the freaking card. If it recycled itself, you could maybe make an argument for it. You can maybe make an argument.
If it recycled itself.
Yeah.
I think it would actually be like an okay, like average card.
Right, sure. I think it'd be fine. But so first of all, it doesn't even change your hand. Like if your hand sucks, you're still stuck with it, right? It only changes the rest of your deck. So you're permanently down 2 mana to start off with. You're down a card. And then every other card that you play, even though you get a choice, has a 1 mana penalty to it.
Yep.
So I don't know. Like it frustrates me when
think of it like make the rest of the cards in your hand in your deck 2 card advantage bigger at the cost of 1 mana, but you've already spent 2 mana, so you're not gonna even get your like even value for it until 3 cards from now. Yeah. Like, and then you add some RNG to it. That's That's what it is. And for everybody who's talking about Explore on Goro as a good card, they're talking about it like the RNG is a good thing, because that's how you win games. And we're like, okay, fine. But the RNG is a bad thing if you're a good player. That's how you lose games. So, like, if you're thinking the RNG is a good thing and you need it to win games, one, you should get better. But more than that, you should just not pick Warrior. Because if you're picking Warrior, you're handicapping yourself. So why are you then trying to make up for it in RNG, right? If you're picking Warrior, you should be like, all right, it's a crap class, but I'm going to try to do my best with this class with my skills, right? If you're just going to try to RNG it, why Warrior? Why not, like, any class, right?
Well, because Warrior has a card that actually allows you to go full RNG. You can't do that with other classes. It's like, what are you going to do? Pick Mage and just pick all the Shimmering Tempest? It's like, great, you're going to pick 2 Shimmering Tempests and, random spells.
Not enough RNG. Okay, I get it. I get it. I just mean it's you can't think of it as a good card. Now, okay. So we talked about why the Warrior is bad. It doesn't have enough 2-drops. It has some 2-drops. It's not totally dead without 2-drops. It has some 1-drops, but not enough to really do anything with it. Can you curve out with the Warrior? No. Should you try to? Yes, because you will die if you don't curve out. There's a whole bunch of taunts going on. That's good for you, because if you just keep taunting, you get hero power, and hero power your way out of a lot of situations. You do have an excellent matchup against the Hunter, which is more frequently seen now than it typically is, so that's good. You, unfortunately, also match up against a lot of Rogues, which I have always maintained is the #1 counter against Warrior. And Mage, which is also really bad against the Warrior, and Paladin, which is also really bad for the Warrior. So, like, as the Warrior, what do you want to see, right? You want to see, like, Warlocks and, like, Priests. So, like, Warrior was in a much better spot the previous meta in MSG, when you actually saw those classes. When Warlock was all over the place, that's actually okay for the Warrior. Now, Warriors are not only, like, have not good enough cards, because they just have a whole bunch of crap cards, but they're also in one of the worst metas possible for them. Because remember, what really kills Warriors also are taunts. Because taunts prevent them from being able to remove the things they need to remove. And there's taunts everywhere. So taunts are good for you, but they're actually even better for your opponent. So in a taunt meta, like, OG was not good for the Warrior, right? The OG meta, the Old Gods meta. This is also not good for the Warrior. It's just, there's nothing you can really do about this kind of stuff meta-wise, because this is where the meta is, but Blizzard has definitely made things worse with the spell bonus when it comes to the Warrior. So is Warrior better now than it was in Arena Warriors Matters era? I don't know. I think we actually, like, I think with the issues with this meta, it may be about the same, like, levels of badness. You do get more consistent weapons, but the meta is so bad for it. Like, the meta in TGT, which is when Arena Warriors Matters came out, that was actually okay for the Warrior meta-wise. Like, and my whole point in that was, look, the meta's kind of favorable for the Warrior, and it's still this crappy. And you're making it crappier. So, like, this is a huge problem. Now it's kind of like, well, the meta's really bad for the Warrior, and the Warrior is bad, and you are literally putting in a spell bonus that does not include weapons for some reason to make it worse. Like, why are you doing this? But it is true that when the meta changes in the next expansion, it'll be more favorable for the Warrior, just period. So, whereas before there was literally no light, like, at the end of the tunnel, there kind of is now for the next expansion, because it's unlikely that it'll make the meta less favorable for the Warrior. Like, there is no meta less favorable to the Warrior than right now. In terms of what classes you see, what cards you see, what the general theme of the arena is. You can't get worse.
Yeah.
You can get worse in terms of the cards you're offered and the power levels, but meta-wise, you can't get worse. This is the bottom. So I don't know. Like, I think it's just so stupid for them to do the spell bonus and not, like, at the very least carve out Warrior specifically and give them a weapon bonus and say this is a special class. But, like, really just to get rid of the spell bonus and replace it with a class card bonus will solve everything. Like, one of the issues I know Blizzard is struggling with in the Arena team is if they did include weapons into the spell bonus, you're going to have, like, Shamans having, like, a ridiculous amount of weapons. You're going to have Paladins having a ridiculous amount of weapons. And they probably wanted to avoid that, even though I don't think that's a problem balance-wise. It was probably not fun to play against, and they're really concerned about things being fun to play against. But as a result of not including it in Warrior, you've basically destroyed a class.
I mean, okay, we've talked about this for a while, and sort of how it's their basis for making a lot of decisions, like what feels good, or what, like what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and what's fun, right? I just don't understand how they define it, because like whenever they designate as something as not fun, I can point to something that's exactly the same, and I'm like, why didn't you change that?
Yep.
Or when they point to something as fun, I'm like,
they're not thinking systematically. They're thinking on literally a case-by-case being reported basis. The more you complain about it, the more... Like in all seriousness, how did we even get good Warrior cards? It's because we complained. No. It's because Crypt complained. It's because the community all supported all of us, and this very, like, logical thing that's like, look, Warrior's trash right now, and you're making it worse.
Right, and then they followed it up with, like, 3 expansions of...
really good individual arena Warrior cards to try to save the Warrior. We complained. Now, other people are complaining. We haven't been complaining. Like, not, like, hard anyway. Like, we're not making videos out there, like, rallying people or anything. We're just voicing our disagreement, essentially, right? Like, and so we're not loud. We're pretty quiet right now. Crip is being louder than we are at this point in terms of how bad the meta is. We agree with everything he said. We were saying it before he was saying it. We were saying when he was saying, oh, everything's fine right now. We were like, no, everything's not fine. It's just being clouded. But now the clouds are gone, you know. So we're all on the same page now. But, like, I don't know. Do we need Arena Warriors Matters too? That's my question. Do we really need to go, like, Arena Warriors Matter again? Or still, or whatever. Do we need to do that? Don't they get it by now? Come on, Blizzard. Like, in the beginning, I know Blizzard didn't get it because they literally didn't talk about the arena and didn't do anything. But they're, like, actively doing things about the arena now. Like, back then, it was, like, negligence, right? Like, now, it's, like, incompetence. I don't know. Like, I feel like giving Blizzard a bit more rope. I'm waiting for the next change. The next change has to be favorable to Warrior. They even now have the stats to back it up. That's the thing, right? Like, we're talking about class win rates. They have stats now. They believe in stats, right? That's their whole thing. They're like, oh, what's fun, what's not fun, and then let's look at the stats and see if there's a problem. Well, the stats are all saying there's a problem right now. It's nothing that we couldn't have told you before there were stats. But now you have stats. You can go to a board meeting or, you know, whatever it is they do, and you can say, hey, look, problem, let's do something. Like, why stick with your spell bonus thing, you know, in the face of objective data that you love so much that's saying the average player is, like, dying as the Warrior. You know, the next change has to be good for the Warrior, because they're out of, like, even on their normal, no matter how much I disagree with their process will lead them to make the Warrior better because it's gotten so bad.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's Warrior. We're going to play the Warrior now. I'm shooting for 3 wins. I think we can beat 3 wins. Good. I think if we get a good deck, we can get 5 wins. And if we get a couple Death Wings, you know, maybe 7, 8 wins is even possible. Yeah. So that's it for today. Until next week, this is Outlook.
This is Merps. Bye, guys.